At my grandfather's funeral, my aunt whispered, "He left you the house. But family shares everything." I nodded respectfully. That night, I changed all the locks and had security cameras installed. When she showed up with a moving truck, I handed her a trespassing notice. She's been contesting the will for 3 years and losing. I, 32M, stood at the back of the funeral home, watching the coffin being lowered while my aunt circled me like a vulture. Grandpa had been gone for 2 days, and she was already making her move. She found me by the parking lot afterward, her perfume overwhelming in the cold air. She placed her hand on my shoulder with that concerned look she'd perfected over the years and told me how sorry she was, how Grandpa loved me so much, how he'd always wanted me to have the house. Then came the part she'd been rehearsing. "Family shares everything," she said. "We need to sit down soon and figure out how to make the property work for everyone." I nodded, told her we'd talk later. She seemed satisfied. What she didn't know was that Grandpa had spent his last 3 months preparing me for exactly this moment. He'd called me to the hospital back in July, his voice weak, but his mind sharp as ever. He wanted to talk about the house, about the will, about her. He knew what was coming. Grandpa had raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 9. My aunt, his daughter, had been around occasionally during my childhood, usually when she needed money or a place to crash between relationships. She'd married twice, divorced twice, and burned through whatever inheritance her mother had left her within 5 years. Grandpa had bailed her out more times than I could count, and each time she'd promised it was the last. It never was. The house was a 3-bedroom craftsman in a neighborhood that had gentrified dramatically over the past decade. Grandpa bought it in 1978 for $42,000. It was now worth close to $800,000. My aunt had been watching the property values climb for years. That night, after the reception where relatives I barely knew told me how much I looked like my father, I drove to the house. I had copies of all the keys Grandpa had given me months ago. The lawyer had already confirmed everything earlier that day. The house was mine, entirely and completely. Grandpa had updated his will 2 years ago, and my aunt had been left a modest cash amount along with some family heirlooms. The house went to me with explicit language that it could not be contested on the basis of family need or shared equity. I called a locksmith. He arrived within an hour, and we changed every lock on every door. Then I contacted a security company Grandpa had recommended. They installed cameras at every entrance by midnight. I wasn't taking chances. The moving truck arrived on Thursday morning. I was having coffee in the kitchen when the security alert pinged on my phone. I watched through the camera feed as my aunt climbed out of a U-Haul with her current boyfriend and 2 guys she'd apparently hired. She walked up to the front door and tried her old key. When it didn't work, she knocked. Then she knocked harder. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. She smiled at me, that same concerned family smile, and said she'd brought some of her things to store in the basement since I had all that extra space now. The boyfriend was already opening the truck's back gate. I handed her the envelope. She looked confused, asked what it was. I told her to read it. She pulled out the trespassing notice while the boyfriend and the 2 hired guys stood there holding a couch between them. Her face went through several distinct phases. Confusion, disbelief, anger. She asked if this was some kind of joke. I told her it wasn't. The property was mine, the will was clear, and she needed to leave. She tried the family card, said Grandpa would be ashamed of me, asked how I could treat her this way after everything she'd done for me. I asked her what exactly she'd done for me. She didn't have an answer for that. The boyfriend put the couch down and started walking toward me. He was a big guy, probably thought he could intimidate me into backing down. I pulled out my phone and showed him the camera feed, told him I had recordings of everything and that the police were on speed dial. He stopped moving. My aunt told him to wait in the truck. She tried a different approach. Started crying. Said she had nowhere else to go, that her current apartment was being sold, and she needed a place to stay just temporarily until she figured things out. I reminded her about the cash inheritance, asked what happened to it. She said that was barely enough to cover her debts. I told her that wasn't my problem. She'd had the same opportunities I'd had, the same grandfather who would have helped her if she'd actually tried to build something instead of just taking. Grandpa had offered to pay for her education twice. She dropped out both times. He'd helped her with a down payment on a condo in 1998. She'd refinanced it 4 times and lost it in foreclosure. She left, but she called her lawyer that afternoon. Update 1. The first legal letter arrived within a week. My aunt was contesting the will on the grounds of undue influence. She claimed that I'd manipulated Grandpa during his illness, that he wasn't of sound mind when he made the changes, that the will should be reverted to an earlier version that split everything equally between us. My lawyer, a woman Grandpa had worked with for 20 years, wasn't worried. She'd been present for multiple conversations with Grandpa about his intentions. He'd undergone a psychological evaluation specifically to prevent this kind of challenge, and the results showed he was completely competent. He'd also recorded a video statement explaining his reasoning, which my aunt didn't know about yet. But my aunt had found an aggressive attorney who was willing to drag this out. They filed motion after motion, requesting documents, depositions, medical records. They wanted to interview Grandpa's doctors, his neighbors, anyone who'd seen him in his last year. They were looking for any tiny inconsistency they could exploit. I spent 3 months responding to discovery requests. My lawyer billed by the hour, and my aunt's attorney seemed determined to make this as expensive as possible. The strategy was obvious. Bleed me financially until I agreed to a settlement. What my aunt didn't know was that Grandpa had set aside money specifically for legal fees. He'd predicted this entire situation and funded a trust that could only be used for defending the will. My aunt was spending her inheritance fighting me while I had a dedicated war chest. The first hearing was in February. My aunt showed up in black, playing the grieving daughter. Her lawyer presented their case, arguing that the dramatic change in the will so close to Grandpa's death was suspicious, that I'd isolated him from family, that he'd been on pain medication that affected his judgment. My lawyer played the video. Grandpa appeared on the courtroom screen, sitting in his hospital bed, speaking clearly and calmly. He explained that he'd raised me, that I'd been the one who visited him every week for 20 years, that I'd never asked him for anything. He detailed every time he'd helped my aunt financially and how she'd squandered it. He stated explicitly that he was of sound mind, that no one had pressured him, and that this was his final decision. The judge took 2 weeks to rule. He found no evidence of undue influence and upheld the will. My aunt's attorney immediately filed an appeal. Update 2. The appeal process took another year. During that time, my aunt escalated from legal challenges to personal harassment. She showed up at my workplace twice, causing scenes in the lobby until security removed her. She called me at all hours, leaving voicemails that ranged from pleading to threatening. She posted on social media about greedy relatives who abandoned family, never naming me directly, but making it obvious enough that mutual acquaintances started asking questions. I documented everything. Every call, every visit, every post. My lawyer said we were building a strong case for a restraining order if needed. The appeals court heard arguments in November. My aunt's attorney had refined their strategy, focusing on a technicality about the way one of the will's pages was witnessed. They'd found a signature that was dated 1 day off from the others and were claiming the entire document was invalid because of it. My lawyer had anticipated this. She produced the original signing sessions video recording, which showed clearly that all pages were signed in one sitting and that the date discrepancy was a simple notary error immediately corrected. The appeals court wasn't impressed with my aunt's arguments. They upheld the lower court's decision in January. My aunt had now spent almost 2 years and most of her inheritance fighting a battle she was losing badly. Her lawyer recommended she drop it. She fired him and found another one. The third lawyer was different. Younger, hungrier, working on contingency. He filed a new challenge claiming elder abuse, arguing that I'd financially exploited Grandpa during his final years. He subpoenaed my bank records, looking for any large deposits or transfers that could be characterized as suspicious. He didn't find any, because there weren't any. Grandpa had been meticulous about keeping our finances separate. When he'd helped me with college, he'd paid the school directly. When he'd given me his old car, we'd done a proper title transfer for $1. Everything was documented and legitimate. But this lawyer was smart enough to make it painful anyway. He deposed my former employers, my friends, anyone who might have witnessed interactions between me and Grandpa. He was hoping someone would say something, anything, that could be twisted into evidence of exploitation. Instead, everyone told the same story. I'd visited Grandpa religiously. I'd helped him with yard work, taken him to doctor's appointments, spent holidays with him. I'd never asked for money. Several people mentioned times when Grandpa had tried to give me cash, and I'd refused it. The hearings for this phase stretched across 8 months. My aunt showed up to every single one, sitting in the gallery with her arms crossed, staring at me. Her new boyfriend, different from the truck guy, came with her sometimes. She was living with him now, I'd heard, because she'd burned through her inheritance and couldn't afford rent anymore. I felt almost nothing looking at her. No anger, no satisfaction, just a kind of tired recognition that this was who she was and who she'd always been. Grandpa had tried to tell her for years that she couldn't blame everyone else for her problems, that she needed to take responsibility for her choices. She'd never listened. Update 3. The judge dismissed the elder abuse claims in September, 3 years after Grandpa's funeral. He issued a strongly worded opinion criticizing my aunt's attorney for bringing frivolous claims and warned that further litigation might result in sanctions. My aunt fired that lawyer too. But she didn't stop. She filed a new pro-se motion, representing herself now, claiming that family property should be held in trust for future generations and that I had a moral obligation to share it with her children, my cousins, who I barely knew because my aunt had moved them across the country years ago during one of her fresh start phases. The court rejected it within a week. The judge included a note suggesting she seek counseling and stop wasting the court's time. She showed up at the house one final time in December. I was putting up Christmas lights when I saw her car pull up. She got out slowly, and I noticed she'd aged dramatically in 3 years. The stress of the legal battles, the money problems, the string of failed relationships. It had all caught up with her. She stood at the end of the driveway, didn't come closer because she knew about the cameras. She asked if we could talk. I climbed down from the ladder and walked halfway down the driveway, keeping distance between us. She said she was sorry, said she'd made mistakes and let her financial stress make her crazy. Said she just wanted family back, wanted to be able to visit on holidays, wanted things to be normal again. I asked if she was dropping the legal challenges. She hesitated, then said her current lawyer thought they still had options. I turned around and walked back to the house. She yelled after me that I was just like Grandpa, stubborn and unwilling to forgive. That's when I realized she still didn't understand. Grandpa had forgiven her dozens of times. He'd helped her over and over, always hoping she'd change. The house wasn't about punishment. It was about protection. He knew she'd either try to take it or guilt me into letting her destroy it the way she'd destroyed every other opportunity she'd had. The Christmas lights looked good that year. I'd hung them exactly the way Grandpa used to, white bulbs along the roofline and around the big oak in the front yard. The neighbors complimented them when I ran into them at the grocery store. The neighborhood association gave me a little certificate. I've lived in the house for 3 years now. I've maintained it carefully, updated the kitchen, refinished the hardwood floors in the hallway. I've kept Grandpa's study exactly as it was, his books still on the shelves, his reading chair by the window. Sometimes I sit there in the evenings and think about the conversations we had, the lessons he tried to teach me about integrity and boundaries and not letting people take advantage of kindness. My aunt's latest lawyer sent a letter last month saying they're considering one final appeal based on some obscure probate technicality. My lawyer says it has 0 chance of success and will likely get them sanctioned. The letter sits in a file in my desk drawer, along with all the others. I don't hate my aunt. I think that's what surprises people when they hear the story. They expect me to be angry or vindictive, to enjoy watching her struggle. I don't. I just understand now what Grandpa understood. Some people will take everything you give them and still demand more. And the only way to preserve anything, including yourself, is to know when to lock the doors. If you like this story, please like this video and subscribe us for more such real-life-based stories. Thanks in advance.